So the Dhamma for today is the 4 dangers for one crossing the ocean. These are from the Chatuma Sutta of the Majjhima Nikaya 67, where the Buddha talks about the 4 dangers for one who travels upon the ocean. It's in response to some young monks who were unruly. It's a sort of well-known story. Some monks who were loud and obnoxious, and so the Buddha chastised them and reminded them the care they need to take, because ordination isn't like a vacation it isn't like a status. You don't become a monk so much as you undertake the training of the monk. The Buddha phrased it as a training. You undertake the holy life. And it's not really wrong to think of ordination as an escape. To some extent, it really is about leaving behind so much stress and suffering that comes from living in the household. It's always described as the dusty road. Living in the household is like a polluted highway in modern times. Congested, noisy, dirty, smelly, hot. All the trouble and chaos that comes from living in the home life is like the road that is in ancient times would be dusty from all the carts and people that are constantly traveling it. Whereas leaving home, ordaining is like the open air. So liberating and freeing. It's even a bit of a danger in itself that we become complacent, because you find yourself suddenly free from all responsibility. You don't have any of the worldly responsibilities that come with living in the world. Responsibilities to society. You don't have to pay taxes. You don't have to go to work. And it's not wrong to appreciate that. It's not wrong to feel liberated by that. It's a criticism that often comes from ordination. You hear people talk about it like it's a vacation. They say, oh, well, I had once had a king, an African king, come to visit in Thailand, and he was not impressed by us at all, but at the end he said, well, I hope you enjoy your vacation. I thought of us being monks was like a vacation. Very rude, actually. I've even had monks, I had a monk once express his sentiment that ordaining was like a vacation, and he was just enjoying his vacation as a monk. It's not wrong to appreciate the bliss, the peace, the happiness that comes from this. There was a story of a king who left his entire kingdom behind to become a monk, and he would sit and revel in the peace and the happiness. Aho sukang, aho sukang. He was meditating on it. He would say, happy, happy, just like we do. And the monks thought he was probably thinking about some happiness as a king. Probably he was reminiscing about the happiness that he had lost. And so they went and they criticized him to the Buddha. And the Buddha called him and he said, "Oh no, I'm just incredibly happy living here without all of the burdens of living as a king." But the danger is that it's not sustainable and it's not permanent, and it is not. It's not the goal of the Buddha's teaching, because it is subject to craving, subject to clinging, subject to disappointment and stress and suffering. It's a polluted sort of happiness. And so the Buddha taught there are 4 dangers, and the dangers relate to this, relate to our complacency, relate to our negligence as Buddhist monks. That we have to think of it as a journey that is fraught with great danger, and any misstep could lead to drowning. And of course, usually as a monk, it doesn't lead to actual death, the way crossing the ocean does. But it leads us to get lost and to drown in samsara. Here we have a very unique opportunity, and so we try our best to take the opportunity. So, what are the 4 dangers that we have to face? The first is the danger of waves. On the ocean there are tidal waves, huge waves that can capsize the largest vessel. The second is crocodiles. Crocodiles aren't going to drown a boat, but there's certainly a danger if you get caught up in the water. You don't want to go swimming in the water of the ocean because of the crocodiles. The third danger is whirlpools. Whirlpools, I've never seen one, but apparently can catch an entire ship up and sink the ship. And the fourth is sharks, the danger of sharks. So again, not something that's likely to capsize a boat, but certainly a danger if your boat sinks. You should rely very much on your boat. Don't leave the boat behind. Don't leave the Dhamma behind is the parallel. So the Buddha said it like this, that these are dangers for someone who goes on across the ocean, and then he said monks have 4 dangers as well, and he said the dangers for monks are likewise waves, crocodiles, whirlpools, and sharks. And then he said, well, what are these for monks? So for monks, they're not literal, obviously. Waves for a monk, someone who ordains as a monk, is the inability to follow the training, follow the teaching that is given. So the Buddha says new monks, they will be told, walk like this, don't walk like this, wear your robe like this, don't wear your robe like that. Stand like this, sit like this. They're told how to do everything. It's like when in our meditation tradition we have this. So we tell you to walk like this. Well, can I walk like that? No. Walk as I told you to walk. Even we tell a meditator to walk with the right foot first, no? Always walk with the right foot first. Why? I told you to. It's an important part of the training that can be overlooked, is the ability to let go, to follow teaching. The reason for going with your right foot first is because I told you to, and it's a challenge. And the Buddha said it like this. He said, a person who is taught like this will think to himself, when I was a lay person, I told other people what to do. Maybe I was in charge, I was a teacher, I was a boss. And now these monks who are young enough to be my sons are telling me what to do. That's how the Buddha said it. And as a result, they give up the training. Something you see. You do see from time to time where people get irritated and even angry when they're told what to do, admonished, don't do that, don't do this, criticized. You know, it's a real challenge. Becoming a monk can be a real ego trip. You feel like you've attained something, you've accomplished something. It can be quite misleading, or there's a danger of becoming self-absorbed, thinking that you are a monk now, you are higher than everyone, and so on. And so it can be hard to make it even harder to follow instruction. You find sometimes that people before they ordained, they were easier to teach than after they ordained. This can happen. So it's important being able to follow, not because it's the only way of doing things, but follow to be able to follow, to be able to let go of ego, to be able to let go of control, let go of self, to not make waves. Really, your best bet is to just go with the flow. You have to think of it as a long-term undertaking, and you have to be patient. Patience is an intrinsic part of the Buddha's teaching. Now, patience for a monk is even more important. Patient with the good things, patient with the bad things, patient with instruction, admonishment. It's a very, very important thing, because you'll find everyone criticizing you. Now you're put up on a pedestal, you're going to have to face so much criticism from everyone. Everyone wants to nitpick you this way or that way. It can be hard to take. The second danger is the danger of crocodiles. Crocodiles have a big mouth. So the Buddha said a crocodile is someone who only thinks about their mouth and thinks about their stomach. That's the Thai way of saying it. They only think about their mouth and their stomach. Someone who is lazy, who is complacent. Ordained as a monk, you don't have to do any of these requirements on you. You can just stay in your kuti, you can sleep all day. Theoretically, if there's no one checking up on you, you could just be lazy, eat and sleep and do nothing. And it's dangerous. It's not sustainable. Over time, you become irritable, you become lazy, and eventually you think to yourself, here I'm told I can't eat this, I can't eat that. You start to get bored of the food, you start to get bored of the monotony. The Buddha said they'll tell you when you can eat, when you can't eat, what you can eat, what you can't eat. And you'll think, before when I was a householder, I could eat what I want. When I wanted to eat this, I'd go buy it. I could go to Starbucks, I could go to McDonald's, I could go to Pizza Hut, I could go to this restaurant or that restaurant, I could cook my own food. Now I can't even cook my own food, I can't store my own food. In the beginning it feels like quite a relief, you don't have to do any of these things, but over time, what I would give for this kind of food or that kind of food, when you don't get the food that you normally are pleased by. Again, a challenge for us. That's why mindfulness is so valuable. We really see it when we're forced to live so immediately in the present. As a monk, you have no money, you can't store things, you can't keep things. So you're constantly having to face the unpredictability of life. And our mindfulness is the best way to deal with that. If you get caught up in liking and disliking and partiality and enjoying and laziness, it becomes It becomes a habitual mind state. It gets stronger and stronger in the mind until eventually you start to get irritable and upset when you don't get what you want and so on. And yes, this is the sort of thing that leads people to disrobe, and eventually the craving becomes too strong. Like a crocodile. Don't just think about your mouth. Crocodiles have a big mouth. The third is a whirlpool. Whirlpools are a danger. The Buddha said, like a whirlpool, the five senses, agreeable and attractive objects at the five senses are like a whirlpool. Sensual pleasures. They drag you down. So not just being lazy, this is being addicted. So addicted to tastes, addicted to sounds, addicted to sights, even addicted to pleasant natural sights. But food, again, it still comes back to food. Food is such an obvious one as monks. But it could be anything. We're taught to guard the senses. And if you're not careful, if you're not actively guarding the senses, it becomes an addiction. You develop these quite subtle addictions as monks. You can be addicted to tastes, you can be addicted to smells, sounds, feelings. You can be addicted to the pleasant feeling of having a comfortable bed and so on, the feeling of your robe, anything like that. Even as monks, we have to guard our senses. Any sound can, even bad sounds, unpleasant sounds can be a source of annoyance and dissatisfaction. Dissatisfaction is a big reason why people disrobe. They're just not feeling happy as a monk. It can be an excuse, and it can dig into you where you feel like you're not happy as a monk, and that means something. And it doesn't actually mean anything. Not being happy as a monk just means you still have attachment. It's not wrong to be unhappy doing something. Happiness and unhappiness are not a good sign of what you're doing is right. It's not a good sign, oh, I'm happy there, I must be doing something right. Not really. Happiness is a resultant. And it's quite complex what causes happiness. Happiness can be associated with greed, it can be associated with wisdom. There's many kinds of happiness. Most importantly is the greed or the absence of greed. So even if it's unpleasant, the Buddha said, even to live the holy life crying with tears in your eyes, suffering, stressed out even about having to face things and not always getting what you want and being forced to endure things that you don't want. This can be a great undertaking. This is actually a perfectly valid way to live. Of course, because like anything, like pleasant states, the unpleasant states don't last. But the long-term benefit is the wisdom and the understanding that life is unpredictable and that the cause of suffering is not the experiences, but our reactions to them, our judgments, our attachments, our desires. So guarding the senses is an integral part of the practice. The Buddha said, like a whirlpool, the sensual pleasures will drag you down. It seems like you're going somewhere when you go around in a whirlpool. Sensual pleasures don't seem like a real problem. Wow, I enjoy it. I'm happy. It's good. This is okay. I can live like this. And slowly, before you realize it, you're in a pit and you can't easily get out. Sensual desires get you stuck. It's not a static thing. Life is not static. Whatever you do that becomes a habit that affects your mind, it changes your mind. It becomes the nature of your mind. And the fourth is sharks. Sharks are a very specific type of danger. If a shark bites you, I think the idea is that they don't let go. You're a goner if they do end up biting you. The Buddha said a shark for a monk is object of sexual attraction. Women, for the most part. Could be women, for some it could be men. Of course, for bhikkhunis it would be men, mostly. So the Buddha said, like, as a monk, maybe you go on alms round and you see a beautiful woman on alms round. Maybe she's attracted to you. Maybe she flirts or she deports herself in some way, and it can be just like a shark. Like the water is so tranquil and you're going on alms round, it's like on the water, it's so pure and clear, and suddenly it bites you. The lust, the desire comes up and you're caught. And it feels like the end of days, the end of life. You know, when you're caught, that sometimes it's impossible to get free. You see, I would say the vast majority of monks who disrobe is because of a woman or desire for a woman. No matter what they say, it will usually be an excuse, there'll be some other reason, but it always comes down to a woman. Not always, but it's quite often the majority of cases. Even monks, there was one monk who, very famous case in Thailand, well, fairly famous, everyone was talking about it, of this monk who was teaching at the university. He'd been ordained for so many years. Honestly, teaching at the university is not necessarily a good sign. Some of those monks who study are not that developed in the practice. But 30, 40 years, and suddenly he was married to a woman. Suddenly he disrobed and got married to a woman. Very hard one to get free from. The desire. It's a narrative. It's the pattern in our mind. You know, what we're brought up to understand, to believe. The very cliche, what you're taught to get a job, to succeed, to get a wife, to have kids, to have a house and a car and all these things. These are so trivial and so meaningless, and yet they've taken on such a meaning for us as human beings. It's a narrative that we have. We're taught from childhood what to do. You get married, that's what people do. You have children, that's what people do. You get a job, that's what people do. All these things, this is what we're used to. This is what we know. And so it's very easy to fall back into that, and very hard to find something to hold on to keep you from falling into it. Why? Because this is what we're doing is not something we're used to. It absolutely is something that no one is used to. If you were used to it, you would be enlightened. Until you become enlightened, this is something new. It's something foreign. Seeing the three characteristics, the goal of the practice, is to see something that we haven't seen yet, ever. Not just in this life, but ever. You have to see things that you've never seen. You have to understand, you have to see reality in a way that you've never seen it. And so it's much easier to go back to what is familiar. Ah, yes, I know that story. I just disrobe, go with a woman, and that's that. Much easier. This one is a shark. This is this thing that will bite you and drag you down. The lesson is ultimately to be mindful. None of these things can overcome someone who is dedicated to mindfulness, and they are not real dangers for someone who is careful. But you have to be careful. Being a monk is not about being, it's about doing. When you walk for alms, to be mindful, walking. When you eat food, to eat chewing, tasting. You're a perpetual meditator. You undertake a life of training, not a life of being or a life of attainment where you can be complacent and happy with what you've attained. Becoming a monk is an undertaking. Just as with the undertaking of a meditator, this lesson is also applicable to anyone who undertakes the meditation practice. They should be complacent, or they should be compliant with the teacher, following their advice, not really questioning it. It doesn't have to be perfect. The teaching doesn't have to be perfect. What's more important is your state of mind. Trying to purify your mind, clarify your mind, and create wisdom and understanding. to not be lazy. Even for meditators, it's possible. Sometimes be lazy. You just go with what you're used to, sleeping and eating, taking it easy. Don't get caught up in the sensual pleasures, and don't get caught up in narratives about marriage and women and life in the outside world. Women is only part of it. Or romance is only part of it. There's romance, some people might think they want to have kids. Some people might think about a job, think about, if I left I could have this career and I could do this and this. Many narratives that we're used to, that are more familiar and more comfortable than being a monk. None of them are of any meaning or any value. Obviously, we've come here with clarity in our mind, and people who are ordained do have a sense that those things are not the source of happiness, not a true source of peace and happiness. It's just that without mindfulness, if we get caught up in states of unmindfulness, it's easy to lose sight of the very glaringly obvious truth that these things only lead to stress and suffering and entanglement. So we try our best to be mindful, try our best to follow the teaching, try our best to be patient and vigilant and diligent. As the Buddha said, appamadena sampadita. If we do that, these things will not be a danger, and the voyage will succeed. We will cross the flood, cross the ocean, and reach the other shore, Paragu, which is the freedom from suffering of Nibbana. So, the 4 dangers, those are the teaching for today, and that's the Dhamma for today.